My name is Lacey Henschel, and this is a Newcomer's Guide to Open Source Contribution. And part of why I'm qualified to give this talk about being a newcomer in open source is because I very much am a newcomer to open source. I work for the University of Texas at Austin. I do that from here in Portland. About a year and a half ago, my husband and I moved here so that he could go to OHSU. And I really didn't want to just work from home and live in a cave, and so I started kind of looking for opportunities to meet people and make some friends here in Portland because I didn't really know very many people. And that was part of how I got involved in open source. But the other, I guess before that, let's make things very clear. Whenever I say that I was not involved in open source before March, I really mean it. And the contrast here is incredibly bad, which actually makes this even better. This is just a big white page. No, this is, if you're not familiar with GitHub, GitHub is a place where you can kind of commit to code repositories. You can make your own, and they provide you with this neat little graph. And every little square on this graph, which you can't really see because they're light gray on white, if that square turns green, it means that you did something that day. You committed to a repository, you did some sort of work. So UT doesn't use Git or GitHub, so I had a profile because I knew from going to DjangoCon several years ago that you're supposed to, but I wasn't really doing anything with that GitHub profile other than kind of logging in once in a while, looking at code bases, and then just sort of closing the window and going away. Then in April, I signed up to give a workshop for Django Girls, which I did here in Portland with the help of a few people in this room and also with the help of Kenneth Love, who is in the other room teaching right now. And from there, things just sort of snowballed. And you see my GitHub profile graph gets very, very green from here on out. There are still some gray days, which is totally fine, but it's much greener, which is really exciting. And then September happened, and September, ironically, was my busiest month in open source. From that very first Django Girls workshop, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute, I wound up being asked to organize a second workshop in Austin as part of DjangoCon. And then I wound up as an organizer for DjangoCon, and then I wound up as their diversity chair. And then I gave a talk at DjangoCon, and then I gave a second talk at a conference in September. So I just wound up doing a whole lot in the month of September, which didn't leave a whole lot of time for logging onto GitHub and committing things, which is part of my point, right? Your GitHub profile is not going to tell the whole story of your life in open source. In fact, it might tell very little of that story depending on the kinds of work in open source that you do. So how to get involved in open source, if you want to. The first tip that people are going to give you is to write some code, submit some sort of a patch, fix a bug, add something, look for those newbie-friendly links, and that's great. But that's not all we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a whole lot of other ways that you can get involved in open source and contribute to the Python community that we all love so much that have nothing to do with code. But let's start with code. So one of my first patches or contributions was adding 2 links to the PyLadies homepage. And PyLadies is really great at newcomers to open source because they have issues in their repo that they just tag newbie friendly, and then they leave them there. And they could do these things in 5 minutes probably, but they leave them there for you. So you can see in June, I tried to do this thing. I tried to add links so that you could buy a t-shirt and a sticker from the PyLadies homepage instead of having to Google that. But I messed it up. Things were not really looking great, and I needed a little bit of help. And someone responded the very next day. Carol was amazing and very helpful to me. And then I didn't come back for 4 weeks because I was having trouble getting my local environment set up. I didn't really understand what I was doing. I was frustrated. I was embarrassed that I was so frustrated because it's 2 links. How big of a deal is this? Why is this hard? Then I got stuff a little bit better, but Lynn wanted me to make the buttons a little bit closer together, which is totally fine. Also, things that were not fine, I switched to the links, so whenever you clicked on buy stickers, it took you to the t-shirt store, and when you clicked to buy t-shirts, it took you to the sticker store. So that was really embarrassing. Then, if you're not familiar with the PyLadies code base, they use Mint, which is a static site generator, and I'd never used one of those before, and I'd stepped away from the code for a while, and every time I went back into it, I had to reorient myself, and it was really hard, and I got confused. And I had this really incredible bug where I would edit the code in the template, and I would save it, and I would start my server, and I would watch my links flip back to how they were. I could see it happen in my editor. And I really thought I was losing my mind. So I tweeted about this. And Ian helped me a whole lot. He helped me figure out that the way that static site generators work is that they actually generate new HTML files. And so I was editing rendered HTML and not the file that was being used to render the HTML. I fixed it. It got merged. Yay. Now you can you can go to the PyLadies website and you can click on the links over there on the right to buy a t-shirt, to buy a sticker. You should do that. You should do that right now. But my point here with this is that getting started in open source can be kind of hard. It can be disorienting even when it's easy. You have to figure out what the code base is doing. You have to figure out how to get things set up locally. And this has so much to do with what Melissa was talking about, that being a beginner, it can be really, really hard. And so I took you through this whole comedy of errors to show you, not that like, look at these wonderful mistakes I made, but to tell you like, even really easy stuff can be hard when you're new. I know how to write a link. I know how to make an anchor tag. Like, clearly that wasn't the issue. The issue was other things that I didn't understand about the code base, and people were there to help me. Speaking of people being there to help you, Porsha Burton, who used to be based here in Portland but now is in DC, she put together this really amazing list of open source projects and resources that are particularly helpful to beginners. And I've included the link there so that if you're a newcomer and you want to start contributing patches to different projects, these would be really good projects to start with. And so that link is going to be, her GitHub username is PKAFEI, and then it's open source _contributor _guide with the github.com at the beginning. And I'll put these slides up on Speaker Deck afterwards, so you'll have that link, and I'll tweet it out. But this is a really handy resource. And also, what a lot of these projects do is they'll tag a lot of their issues like newbie friendly or easy pickings or for beginners. And so you know, like, these are the ones that they intend for you to do if you've never done this before. And they can help you get oriented with the code base, help you have a win pretty soon, get that W really easily, and then you can keep going. But that's just one small way that you can contribute to open source. And writing code is fun. We're all here because we're developers, we care about code, we write in Python, it's really, really wonderful. But the other point that I want to make is that we're all here. We're at this particular event today, and that event took a lot of people a lot of hours to put together. So, for example, we have people here taking photos, we have people here running around running errands, we had someone who delivered coffee. And there are a lot of different events that you can take part in. My first foray into open source was Django Girls. And if you're not familiar with Django Girls, that's a nonprofit organization that helps people put on one-day workshops to teach women, some men, but mostly women, how to program in one day. They build a website from scratch. They learn HTML, CSS, Python, and Django, and they have a blog at the end of the day. And it's really, really fun. But again, that takes several people to do. So I had a fellow organizer who was helping me line up sponsors, get a venue, rent the things that we needed, order food, etc. But then we also had like 15 or 18 coaches who showed up to help guide a small team of 2 or 3 women through a tutorial over the course of a day. And that could be you. And you might be thinking, well, I don't really know enough Python or even Django to figure this out. Well, one of the coaches, Terry, in the room today, she didn't know Django before she signed up to coach. She signed up to coach so she could learn Django. The tutorial is there, right? And she was an amazing coach. And now she's signed on to be our 3rd co-organizer for the next Django Girls event coming to you 2016. I hope a lot of you will sign up as coaches. But yeah, she had coached at some other like Rails events, and Terry, and I hope you don't mind me just like sticking you out here right now. But she had signed up for some Rails Girls events and had a really good time and really enjoyed teaching. So she emailed and said, I don't know Django, but I can learn it, you know, and I said, sure. And then she was volunteering. She was one of our coaches, and she did a wonderful job. I think my whole point with this slide, I just kind of got a little bit behind there, but yeah, my whole point with this slide is that yes, you can volunteer to organize, you can coach. If you're at an event like this one, you can sign up to do things. I know that they had an amazing volunteer app. That could be you. If you're at a conference and they're doing swag bag stuffing, that could be you. And last year, I didn't do the swag bag stuffing at PyCon because I didn't really know anybody, and I was afraid of like it would just be too much and too busy. And then everyone said how much fun it was and how they met such wonderful people, and they really bonded with the people next to them. And the way that Melissa talks about it now, this year at PyCon, I'm going to swag bag stuff, and that's going to be like my next way that I contribute open source, is I'm going to put free stuff in free bags that then you get handed to you the next day. And this year, PyCon is here in Portland, so you have no excuse. Hopefully all of you will be swag bag stuffing with me, and you'll know at least one person, so you should definitely do that. Another way that people talk about contributing to open source is writing docs, but one of the things is that no one really tells you what that means, and writing docs for open source can mean a lot of different things. But one of the things that it draws on are those written and verbal communication skills that you've all heard about. And I know this appears in like every job ad that I see, including programmer ones, right? Like must have excellent written and verbal communication skills. Docs are part of that. That's the written part of written and verbal communication skills. And it can be really, really tiny stuff. It can be correcting one typo. This shouldn't be my ENV, it should be my VENV, and somebody saw that and they submitted a pull request to correct that. It can be slightly bigger stuff. One of the really common things that happens after Django Girls workshops is that some of the participants or the coaches realize that there was a section in the tutorial that the participants stumbled over. And so they submit a PR that says, hey, this was confusing. I've reworded it in a way that I think is clearer. What do y'all think? And that could be you too. If you're reading documentation about a project that you want to contribute to, it might not be a tutorial. It might actually be documentation about how to get set up on your local environment or how this one particular piece of code works. And it's confusing, or you have to read a sentence 2 or 3 times to figure out what it's talking about. That's an opportunity for you to make those docs better. That's an opportunity for you to submit a PR that says, hey, I found this confusing. I've reworded it in a way that makes more sense for me. Or, hey, you said that this would happen whenever I set things up on my local environment, but that's not what happened for me. What happened for me was slightly different, and this PR accounts for that. It can also be slightly bigger things, like whole new sections of a tutorial or a manual, for example. So whenever I started organizing Django Girls, one of the things that I noticed about their organizer's manual, which is extensive, they had a ton of wonderful information in there, but they didn't have anything in their manual about how to make their events accessible to people with disabilities. And I have a wonderful friend in Florida who is a disability studies scholar. So I sent her an email and I said, I'm doing this thing, I'm organizing this workshop. What do I do to make this accessible to people with disabilities? And she sent me back an email. And I got her permission to turn that into a whole chapter for the Django Girls Organizers Manual. And I asked the organizers of the Django Girls proper in London if that was okay, and they were really excited about it. So I wrote the chapter, I submitted it, and it got merged. That's an example of documentation. It's not documentation about code, but it's documentation about how to run a workshop that teaches people to code, right? It counts. And it shows up as a green square on GitHub, so you totally know it counts. The fourth way that you can get involved in open source is to write things that aren't docs, or to speak at conferences like this. You can share your experience of a particular thing. And again, this is the verbal part of those written and verbal communication skills. And one of the things that's most important about, one of the things I want you to keep in mind about writing something or speaking on a particular topic is that you do have something to say. I hadn't given any sort of conference presentation before this past July because I really didn't think I had anything to say. I don't know a whole lot about Python. I'm not a fantastic programmer. I can't tell you how to do stuff. But what I realized is that I did know some things that other people didn't know, or I cared about things that other people didn't care about, or hadn't thought to care about, or I had particular experiences that might be relevant to other people. So this is an example of a blog post that the Django Girls Atlanta organizer wrote after she did Django Girls Atlanta. And this is a long blog post, and she had some wonderful ideas in there about how to make your workshop more welcoming, how to ensure that you had a 100% RSVP rate and the people who RSVP'd actually showed up, how to make it inclusive, how to feed everybody. And a lot of this is in the manual, but it's presented in a different way. Here, she has her personal experience about what she did that worked really, really well, and it's really wonderful. These are 2 other examples by me and also by Kenneth of just like blog posts that we've done or articles that we've written on different websites. And Kenneth writes a lot of more like technical blog posts. A lot of people do, right? Like if you want to know how to do something, you Google it. And maybe Stack Overflow is the answer, but maybe somebody has published a blog post with this full tutorial about how to add a login button to your website or how to do a particular thing. That could be you. If you have a particular problem that took you a while to solve, even if it was a pretty simple problem, if you had to go to 4 or 5 different places to figure out how to solve your problem, you can write up that process. You can say, the pieces of information I got from these 5 different sites, I wanted to put together in one page and cite all of those things, but have this for you for later. And that doesn't mean that you have to have like a yourname.com blog. Like that's what Gist is for, right? Like you can just write a README, stick it up on Gist, it's totally fine. But that can be really, really helpful for helping other people figure out how to do stuff. And in terms of speaking, again, I want to point out that everyone in here has something to say. You have an experience that's helpful to people. I'm not I don't even know what the term, I'm not an open source celebrity, right? I'm not someone who's been around a really long time, who's been doing open source for a really long time, which is why I feel like I'm qualified to tell you the different ways that you can get involved. Because very little of what I do in open source consists of committing code for like reasons that I showed you before. But I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Which probably means it's time for a sip of water. But this is the thing too, right? Whenever you speak, you might stumble a little bit. This is a perfect example. But things might not go exactly as planned. But it's good for y'all to see that. Just like it's good that Treehouse keeps examples of mistakes in their videos, it's good for you to see that you can be a new speaker, you can stumble a little bit, but you still have something that's positive and hopefully relevant to say. And the last thing that you can do to be more involved in open source is volunteer. And this kind of encompasses pretty much everything that I've talked about before, because most open source work is unpaid, and so by definition you're volunteering. But there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. When I talked before about conferences, there's a whole lot of things that you can do to make a conference happen. You can stuff the swag bags, or you can sign up to introduce somebody, or you can sign up to be the person who escorts them from the speaker's room to where they're going to be speaking. You can also sign up to teach things. Like you can teach at workshops like Django Girls, or you can sign up to teach a remote class for PyLadies. You can go to your local meetups and offer to do a one-night class on a particular topic that you find interesting. So about me today, I'm involved in a lot of different things. I've done a lot with open source, but that's been pretty recent. That's just the past few months. And so I hope that my experience has helped you figure out new and different ways that you can get involved in open source that aren't just about writing code. But if writing code is what you really want to do, the resources are there. So this is a link to Porsha's list. And also this is a link to Don't Be Afraid to Commit. So if you're not super familiar with Git or GitHub, or you're not really familiar with how to pick out an issue, submit a PR, et cetera, then that's where you need to go. And that's all I've got. And my motion there was asking if we were doing QA, and she nodded, so yeah. So does anyone have any questions? Sure, yeah. Yes. So those were just different sort of open source projects that I've been involved in over the past 6 months that go around the UT Longhorn logo. One of them was the logo for DjangoCon, where I wound up helping out this year. One of them was the PyLadies logo, because that's the project that I committed to. One was the Jengo Girls logo, and one was the opensource.com logo. I turned my talk from DjangoCon into an article for opensource.com, and that got published earlier this week. And that was one of the screenshots that I had up there too. So, oh yeah, sure. Oh, so I plan on submitting a talk to PyCon. I'll be at PyCon, and I intend to stuff swag bags. It is up to them whether I speak. So the powers that be have not yet spoken, probably because I have not yet submitted my talk. Also, though, the PyCon CFP is open right now, and like I said, PyCon is going to be here in Portland next year. I think it's happening next May, is that right? Yeah. Memorial Day weekend. So if you want to not go out of town and instead you want to stay in town and talk about code, you should come to PyCon and stuff swag bags and submit a talk and listen to talks, and yeah.
If anyone would like to write a question, you also can. That may not be as relevant for this talk. But...
All right, thanks everyone.